The test sat there, two bright blue lines screaming positive. Seriously, right now, in this absolute mess of a life I've created? My hand shook, the urge to throw it across the room almost uncontrollable. But no, instead, I had to play the part of the happy, excited, expectant mother-to-be. That's the role I decided to assign myself, right? Babe, dinner's ready. Mark's voice filtered through the bathroom door. I shoved the pregnancy test into my pocket, cursing myself for being so careless. The past few days had been one hellish blur. Fear was a constant companion. Nausea settled in the pit of my stomach like a stubborn lump of guilt. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The world around me felt off kilter. Sarah, you okay? Mark peered into the dining room, worry wrinkling his forehead. You've barely touched your food. And just like that, he nailed it. Every shared meal, every loving touch in bed, had become unbearable since it happened. Jake's urgent face flashed in my mind as he demanded, "What are we going to do about this?" We? Who the hell was we? My eyes filled with stinging tears, and I blamed it on pregnancy hormones. Sleep refused to come that night. The ceiling fan whirred relentlessly in the oppressive summer heat, and each creak of the floorboards sounded like Mark's accusing footsteps. I'd memorized the way he breathed, the quiet rhythm of his heartbeat against my back. Each measured breath felt like a slap. My phone buzzed, and a jolt of panic shot through me. It was Jake, the source of this whole damned mess. "We need to talk," the text read. No question mark, more of a grim statement of fact. I spent the next few hours obsessively scouring the internet for discrete prenatal paternity tests, my stomach churning with each potential scenario. It was insane. My whole life felt like an out-of-control train wreck, and I was just along for the ride, clinging to wreckage. "You have an appointment with Dr. Phillips next week, right?" Mark's voice, cheery with the naive excitement only an expectant father could have. I'd usually have loved hearing that. Now it made my blood run cold. Yeah, yeah, just a routine checkup," I managed, my voice catching. He leaned in, planting a kiss on my head. "Have you been keeping up with your vitamins?" God, if he only knew. Those innocent questions about family history, about genetics. Did the doctor suspect something? Was everyone on to me? Panic set in. I needed an escape plan. Suddenly, I remembered why I'd gotten into this disaster in the first place. Jake was a mess, sure, but he'd always seemed desperate to start a family. Hadn't he talked about finally settling down? With me? Frantically, I scrolled through our old text messages, seeking any shred of evidence. My heart sank. Sure, there was playful flirting, but nothing that confirmed a deep desire for fatherhood. Nothing that could help my situation now. There it was. Another step into this tangled mess I was calling my life. My skin prickled. "Honey, how about a nice, relaxing bath?" "You seem a little stressed," Mark suggested. It was the same concerned tone he'd used lately, like I was a fragile piece of glass about to shatter. But stressed was an understatement. I couldn't touch him. It felt wrong, sinful, almost. Mark's gentle hands, once a source of comfort, now felt like accusations. His excitement over the baby, his plans for the nursery were like nails on a chalkboard. Work became my escape. Each mundane email, every boring meeting, was a reprieve from the crushing weight at home. Still, fear lurked in the corners of my mind, whispering what-ifs. A stray text from Jake would send me into a tailspin. What if someone checked my call log? What if a coworker noticed my distracted state? Jake's texts were a strange mix of desperation and vague reassurance. "We'll figure this out," he'd say, but then the next day it was, "Tell me what you're going to do." The unspoken threat, the weight of his need, was more than I could handle. Something shifted at home. I'd grown hypersensitive to Mark's moods. Was that a hint of anger in his voice? Did his "good morning" seem a little short? Or was that just my paranoia run wild? Was he on to me? It was exhausting, this perpetual state of high alert. Then, there was that run-in with Emily at the grocery store. Jake's wife, her bubbly, "How are you doing, Mama?" as she patted her own rounded belly sent icy tendrils of fear down my spine. I choked out some generic pleasantries, desperately wanting to run. It wasn't just her. Everyone was starting to look like a potential threat. The nightly ritual of deleting Jake's texts and calls became obsessive, but it did nothing to erase the evidence in my own treacherous mind. At night, insomnia was my constant companion. I'd stare at the framed photo of my daughters, their sweet smiles stabbing at my heart. The guilt gnawed at me. What kind of example was I setting for them? My life had become a masterclass in deception. My smiles were fake, my affection forced. I was an actress in the worst play ever written, and with every passing day, the fear of being caught threatened to swallow me whole. I was a ticking time bomb, but nobody knew it but me. Or did they? Discreet at-home DNA testing. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a mixture of desperation and dread churning in my stomach. The internet was a double-edged sword, a wealth of information, but also a terrifying rabbit hole of potential consequences. What if someone tracked my searches? The fear sat like an unwelcome guest in my chest, a constant companion. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Under the guise of an urgent work lunch, I slipped away to meet with a genetic counselor. Her clinical tone did little to ease my anxiety. As she explained the procedures, the swabs, the timeline, it all felt like some nightmarish science fiction movie. "We'll get the results to you as quickly as possible," the counselor said, her crisp smile somehow making it all feel more surreal. Walking out of her office, I felt branded. Surely, anyone could see the secret I was now carrying in my very DNA. Jake's constant texts were a relentless tormentor. "We have to figure this out," he'd demand. But my every text back felt like another knot in the tangled mess of lies. Mark's plans for a baby moon weekend felt like some cruel joke. A sudden, out-of-town work conference became the perfect alibi. I booked the flight with shaking hands, guilt swirling like a storm inside of me. That sterile hotel room became my secret laboratory. The DNA kid sat on the bed, a silent accusation. Swabbing the inside of my cheek felt like I was taking a piece of my soul and laying it bare for judgment. Sending off that envelope was the most desperate act of my life. A desperate hope for some sort of clarity, mixed with a dread so deep it threatened to drown me. The hotel room phone blinked red when I least expected it. Mark's name glowed on the screen. "Just checking in, honey bun. Wanted to hear your voice." His tone was soft, loving. Suddenly the hotel room felt suffocating. The lies pressing down on me. Back at the office, Jake had started getting sloppy. In the dull glow of my computer screen, his normally playful texts crackled with tension. He was unraveling too, and his desperation only fueled mine. An invitation pinged through. Coffee, casual catch-up. Did he know? Was it a trap? Or was he just as lost and drowning as me? The waiting was agony. Each tick of the clock felt amplified. At home, I was a walking disaster. Rearranging furniture, scrubbing at imaginary stains, it was useless. My mind was on a perpetual spin cycle, churning through endless disaster scenarios. Then, it came. The email I'd been dreading. My trembling fingers hovered over the mouse. The words, "DNA test results," practically burned into my retinas. I took a deep breath, and clicked. My heart took an involuntary leap into my throat. It was a single word, sitting amidst the medical jargon of the DNA test results. Positive. My eyes scanned the document again, rereading the phrase that was both a crushing indictment and an oddly twisted relief. The alleged father is the biological father of the child. The world narrowed into a pinhole of confusion. Was this a sick joke? A cruel mistake? Everything in me rebelled against it, even as another, darker part settled into a despairing certainty. Jake's child, growing inside me, my stomach lurched, disgust warring with a wave of utter defeat. I was a tornado of emotions, shock, rage, grief. It wasn't just for myself, but for Mark, his dreams of fatherhood now a twisted mockery. For my daughters, who would be welcoming an innocent yet unknowing party into the dynamite I'd created. I slammed my laptop shut, the harsh click seeming to echo in the silent room. I scrubbed the test results from my browser history, deleted emails, anything that could be used as proof of my deception. It felt like a futile attempt at damage control, but it was all I could manage in that swirling vortex of panic. My phone buzzed. It was Jake, and my thumb hovered over the decline button. Ignoring him wasn't an option. The thought of confronting him filled me with both dread and a flicker of perverse curiosity. What was his game now that the truth was out? Desperate for help beyond my own shattered thoughts, I searched frantically for a therapist. Someone who couldn't possibly know me, couldn't judge the mess I'd become. Sarah Smith. I lied when scheduling, the false name sounding strange and hollow. Each interaction with Mark felt like needles under my skin. His plans for decorating the nursery, his gentle teasing about my pregnancy cravings. They'd always been sweet, endearing. Now, they were torture, a constant reminder of my monstrous betrayal. Worst of all was the solace I started to find in my daughters. Their innocent laughter, their fierce, unquestioning love for me felt like a rebuke. How could I look at them, knowing I carried a secret that could tear our family apart? Was I even worthy of being their mother anymore? There it was, the question I kept circling back to. Was it time to come clean? Tell Mark everything? What about Jake? Surely he had a responsibility in this. Yet, a terrified voice whispered in my mind. Could I ever survive the fallout? The coffee shop was buzzing, but I might as well have been alone on a deserted island. Jake sat across from me, looking just as miserable and shell-shocked as I felt. The casual facade we'd once shared was gone. This was raw and ugly. What the hell are you going to do? His accusation hung heavy in the air, his usual flirtatious tone replaced by fear-laced anger. He'd made that mess with me, but now, he was placing the responsibility squarely at my feet. I don't know, I choked out. My carefully rehearsed plan to confront him, to demand honesty, crumbled in the face of his desperation. He can't find out, Jake hissed, then glanced around like we were being watched. We probably were. Everyone seemed like a spy these days. Then, he dropped a bombshell. Emily knows. The world lurched sideways. Knows what? My voice was a rasp. How could his wife, sweet, bubbly Emily, know about us? Not the baby, not yet. Jake mumbled, his voice dropping. But she knows about us. I screwed up. Okay? He looked away, shame washing over his face. Another twist of the knife. Another crack in my own precarious facade. This mess had tentacles, reaching into lives I couldn't even comprehend. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair back. I have to go. Every instinct screamed at me to flee this conversation, this disaster. Sleep was a cruel mistress, refusing to grant me escape. My mind replayed the confrontation with Jake on an endless loop, interspersed with Mark's worried face. Had he always looked this concerned? Or was I just now noticing the creases of worry, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore? The only relief came from feverishly scribbling in a hidden notebook, page after page filled with my barely legible scrawl, an endless outpouring of shame, fear, and desperate justifications. It was the only way to contain the chaos threatening to consume me. The kindness of strangers startled me. An exhausted mom in the grocery line, offering support as I fumbled to corral my daughters. An older woman on a park bench who simply smiled, her presence oddly reassuring. I craved human connection, yet recoiled from it, suspecting judgment behind every glance. Mark shifted into this new mode. Gentle detachment replaced his easy affection. He'd ask, "Are you okay?" Like he barely expected an answer. We went through the motions, dinner, bedtime stories, shared space, yet we felt like strangers in our own home. I was unraveling piece by piece. My once ordered life was a house of cards, each passing day threatening to blow it all apart. There was only one way forward, as terrifying as it was. He had to know. Mark had to know. But how? When? Each question circled in my head, a carousel I couldn't escape. It was the way I said, "Honey, that did it." Not the usual sweetness. Something was off. Too detached. Maybe with a hint of forced cheer that my frayed nerves couldn't quite mask. Mark picked up on it instantly. His plate with the half-eaten salmon clattered down a little too harshly. "Is something wrong? You seem distant." His voice was deceptively calm. My world narrowed down to a single point. To escape, to deflect, or the terrifying alternative. Distant, I echoed, trying to sound playful, but my voice cracked. He just stared, the look on his face a chilling mix of suspicion and dawning hurt. I collapsed onto a kitchen chair, unable to bear the weight of the deception any longer. Tears came then, unstoppable waves of shame and fear washing over me. Mark, I need to tell you something. The words spilled out in a jumbled, incoherent rush. Betrayal, Jake, the baby. It all came tumbling out in a torrent of desperate honesty. His reaction wasn't what I'd anticipated. Not shouting, not violence, but something colder, more devastating. He went still, his face hardening into a mask. Then, he simply stood, the scraping of his chair against the floor the loudest thing in the room. How long? His voice was flat, chilling. I don't know. I choked out, a pathetic excuse that seemed to ignite the rage he'd held so tightly in check. What followed was a blur. Accusations flew, mixed with the shattering sound of my pathetic apologies. Years of love, of trust, exploded like shrapnel, cutting deep into both of us. There was mention of wasted years, of the baby he'd longed for being someone else's, of our daughters tainted by my deception. Then, he walked out, the slam of the front door echoing the finality of it all. Desperate, I reached for Jake, my last clinging thread of support. But his own life was an inferno. Emily had left, taking their kids. He offered no comfort, just a panicked demand to fix this. And then, an unexpected ray of clarity. It came as I crumpled on my bedroom floor, a whirlwind of despair. It was the thought of my daughters, sleeping in their rooms, oblivious to the disaster that had struck. I wouldn't crumble entirely, not for them. I'd fallen, but for their sake. I needed to find a way to stand again. The call to the lawyer felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The unfamiliar legal terms, the chilling reality of divorce, of a custody fight, sent waves of despair crashing down. Yet, there was also a grim resolve. I'd done this to myself, but I'd be damned if I'd let the consequences destroy the innocent parties in this mess. This was the beginning of my fight, a fight against 1,000 small humiliations, the judgmental stares, the rumors that stung like wasps. This was a war to win back my children, a war to reclaim my right to be their mother even after my devastating failure. This was my fight to rebuild a life worth living from the rubble of the one I'd so carelessly destroyed. News spread fast in a small town, and mine burned especially bright. Whispers followed me in the supermarket aisles. Old friends' stares turned cold in passing. Judgment hung in the air as heavy as my own guilt. Court-mandated therapy became a lifeline I clung to with surprising desperation. My therapist, Dr. Owens, wasn't there to judge. Her role, it seemed, was to hold up a mirror, forcing me to look at the wreckage I'd caused. It was brutal, peeling back layers of self-justification to reach the raw, ugly truth. Why had I done it? It wasn't just about Jake, but something twisted and broken within me. It was an explanation, not an excuse, and the difference held the key to rebuilding. The custody battle was a war of attrition. Mark was fueled by righteousness, his hurt turning to implacable anger. My every mistake, every lapse in judgment was meticulously documented, used as ammunition to paint me an unfit mother. His once gentle eyes turned flinty every time he saw me, the shared history between us nothing but a casualty in this battle. Then came the twist no one expected. A knock on my door revealed Emily standing nervously on my porch. Stiffly, she offered a single, startling sentence: "We should talk." Over cups of stale tea, an unlikely connection formed. Two women bound by betrayal, sharing tear-soaked stories on my worn-out sofa. Our conversations were lifeline, a strange sort of solidarity against the man who'd broken both our hearts. We strategized not out of malice, but self-preservation, trading information that could level the legal playing field. In a desperate search for purpose, something to offset the gnawing guilt, I began volunteering at the local women's shelter. At first, it was daunting, their stories a painful echo of my own failures. But helping these women find their voices, navigate escape plans, and begin to heal ignited a spark within me. My shame was still a constant companion, but alongside it grew the determination to do good as penance for the deep hurt I had caused. Then, there was the fight within myself. Days turned into weeks, then months. The wounds of Mark's rejection began to scar over, yet I still longed for his forgiveness, knowing I may never have it. The thought of my daughters growing up with a fractured family was a constant ache, but I fought for them, for my right to rebuild. The final court decision wasn't a clean victory. Custody was shared, tainted by unspoken conditions and lingering distrust. It was a bittersweet compromise, but a starting point. I rented a small apartment, enrolled the girls in a new school, began a part-time job. The pieces of a new life began to clumsily take shape. Scars don't vanish overnight. The road to redemption, if I ever reach it, will be long and winding. But I walk it now with eyes open. There are moments of grace amidst the wreckage. A genuine smile from one of my daughters, a flash of connection with Emily, a flicker of pride over my hard-fought victories. It's these glimmers that give me hope that, maybe, just maybe, I can become worthy. I stepped into our favorite Italian spot, decked out in those string lights I've always adored. I knew it was going to be a night to remember. Mark had that look in his eye, the same one from our first date, and I couldn't help but fall for him all over again. "Happy anniversary, Em," he said, his voice wrapping around me like a warm blanket, as we clinked glasses, filled with the cheap but delicious wine we'd come to love. We dove into memories of Venice, our laughter echoing around the small, cozy space. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, planning a future that seemed as bright as the candles on our table. The next day was back to reality, the usual 9-to-5 grind. I found myself at the public library, surrounded by books and the quiet hum of daily life, while Mark crunched numbers at the firm. Our texts during lunch were the highlights of my day, simple yet filled with love. "What's for dinner?" he'd ask, and I'd send back a suggestion, along with a silly emoji or two. It was mundane, sure, but it was our mundane. Then came the weekend barbecue, our backyard buzzing with the chatter of our diverse group of friends. Sarah and Alex from next door, always with a story to tell, joined us, along with a mix of faces from our past and present. The smell of grilled burgers filled the air, mixing with laughter and music. It was simple, nothing fancy, but it was perfect. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across our porch, Mark and I shared a dream. A small vacation home by the lake, I mused, envisioning lazy weekends away from the hustle of everyday life. Mark's hand found mine, a silent vow that we'd make it happen, together. It was moments like these that I cherished the most. But life wasn't always picture perfect. When Mark's mom got sick, it felt like our world was tumbling down. I stood by him, every hospital visit, every tough night. We leaned on each other, our bond unbreakable, even in the face of grief. Then, Chris walked into my life. He was new at the library, with a passion for literature that matched my own. Our lunch breaks turned into book discussions, his insights and humor bringing a new spark to my day. It was refreshing, exhilarating, and a little bit dangerous. The danger became real the day Chris invited me for coffee after work. "It's just to discuss the book launch," he said, but the thrill in my heart said otherwise. I told Mark I'd be working late, a lie that tasted bitter on my tongue. The evening was enjoyable, innocent on the surface, but beneath it all was a lie that would change everything. I woke up, the anticipation was already bubbling inside me. I'd be seeing Chris at work, and the thought alone sent a jolt of excitement through my veins. It was wrong, I knew it, but it was like a drug I couldn't resist. Our texts had become my daily dose of adrenaline, each ping igniting something forbidden within me. We'd started off talking about books, but soon, our conversations veered into personal territories, blurring lines I never intended to cross. Then, it happened. After a work event, amidst the buzz of half-drunk colleagues and the dim lighting of the bar, Chris kissed me. It was a moment of weakness, a split second where all reason was drowned out by a rush so intense, it scared me. I pulled away, my heart racing, guilt washing over me in an unforgiving wave. Yet, beneath it all, there was an undeniable thrill, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. The affair took on a life of its own after that. I found myself spinning a web of lies, telling Mark one had enrolled in a night class for professional development. The guilt gnawed at me with each secret meeting with Chris, But the excitement was like a siren call I couldn't ignore. Mark started to notice. Is everything okay? He'd ask, his eyes searching mine for a truth I wasn't ready to give. Yeah, just tired from class, I'd lie, hating myself a little more each time. The trust we had built over the years was crumbling, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. It wasn't long before I was buying a new phone just to communicate with Chris, a move that felt like crossing the point of no return. I concocted elaborate stories to explain my absences, each lie more intricate than the last. I was trapped in a tangled mess of my own making, too far gone to find my way back. The weekend getaway with Chris was the turning point. It was reckless, a glaring declaration of my betrayal. As we spent those stolen days together, I convinced myself that I had found something deeper, something more exhilarating than what I had with Mark. It was a lie, a beautiful, dangerous lie that seduced me into making the biggest mistake of my life. The confession to Mark was the hardest thing I've ever done. I sat across from him, the words tumbling out in a chaotic rush, each one a dagger in the heart of our marriage. I'm leaving, I said, my voice breaking with the weight of my betrayal. The look on his face, a mix of pain, disbelief, and heartbreak, will haunt me forever. He had given me his all, and I had thrown it away for a fleeting thrill. As I watched him grapple with the reality of my words, I knew there was no going back. The damage was done, and the life we had built together was shattered beyond repair. The boxes were barely unpacked when the novelty of my new life with Chris began to fade. Each morning, waking up in a space that wasn't ours, Mark's and mine, felt like a slap in the face. Chris's apartment, cluttered and unfamiliar, was a constant reminder of the life I'd impulsively thrown away. I tried to make the best of it, telling myself this was freedom, but deep down, a gnawing regret started to take root. Chris and I, we were like a firework, brilliant and thrilling at first, but not meant to last. The excitement of sneaking around, the adrenaline rush of the forbidden, it all evaporated, leaving us with the reality of our day-to-day lives. And it wasn't long before our differences, once charming and novel, became glaringly obvious. His casual messiness clashed with my need for order, his spontaneity a stark contrast to my love for routine. I missed Mark there. I admitted it to myself for the first time. I missed the stability he provided, the comfort of our shared life. Every small disagreement with Chris was a bitter reminder of what I had given up. Our first major fight was over something so trivial I can't even remember now, but it was enough to highlight the stark difference in how we handled conflict. Mark and I, we would have talked it out, found a compromise. With Chris, it was a battle of wills, each of us too stubborn to back down. Loneliness crept in, filling the spaces between Chris's and my conversations. I missed my friends, our neighbors, the community Mark and I had been a part of. I had not only left my husband, but I had also left behind a network of support, a family of sorts that I now realized I needed more than I'd admitted. A visit to the library for some semblance of normalcy turned into a painful reality check. Hiding behind a shelf, I overheard my former colleagues talking about Mark. He's doing really well, looks happier, one said. My heart sank. He had moved on, found happiness without me, while I was stuck in a life filled with regret. Desperate for a connection to my old life, I reached out to Mark, only to find my calls unanswered, my messages unreturned. His number had been changed, and I was blocked on social media. The finality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no going back. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. This new reality, one I had so naively thought I wanted, was nothing like I had imagined. The excitement had faded, leaving in its wake a profound sense of loss and a longing for the life I had so carelessly thrown away. I found the emails on Chris's laptop. My world came crashing down for the second time in less than a year. There it was, in black and white, the undeniable proof of his infidelity. My heart raced as I confronted him, the urgency and betrayal mixing into a toxic cocktail of emotions. It was never that serious, he said, shrugging off my anger and hurt with a nonchalance that cut deeper than his betrayal. I felt trapped, ensnared in a relationship that was supposed to be my escape but had turned into my prison. Arguments with Chris became as regular as our morning coffee, each one eroding what little happiness I thought I'd found with him. I was spiraling, losing grip on the life I'd fought so hard to create. In a desperate attempt to claw back some semblance of my old life, I reached out to friends, only to be met with cold shoulders and unanswered calls. The realization hit hard. In my pursuit of something new, I'd burned bridges I desperately needed now. I was alone, more so than I'd ever been. With nothing left to lose, I found myself standing outside Mark's house, heart pounding, a mix of hope and fear swirling inside me. But the sight that greeted me shattered any remaining illusions. Mark, looking happier than I'd ever seen him, with someone else. Their laughter echoed in my ears, a painful reminder of what I'd thrown away. Chris's patience ran out not long after. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his words final, leaving no room for negotiation. I was out, my belongings unceremoniously packed into boxes, a stark symbol of my failed attempt at a new beginning. I moved into a small, drab apartment, the loneliness palpable in its empty rooms. Work became my only escape, but even that was slipping through my fingers. My performance had tanked, my mind always elsewhere, trapped in a maze of regret and what-ifs. The day I was let go from the library, the place that had once been my sanctuary, felt like the final blow in a series of defeats. I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I hardly recognized anymore, each day a struggle to find some footing in the chaos I'd created. This chapter of my life, marked by loss and regret, was a far cry from the dreams I'd once harbored. The stark reality of my choices weighed heavily on me, a constant reminder of the life I'd forsaken for a mirage of happiness that turned out to be nothing but a cruel illusion. The silence of my small apartment was deafening, a constant reminder of the void my life had become. As I sat there, day after day, the weight of my decisions pressed down on me, a relentless force reminding me of the chaos I'd brought upon myself. The reality of what I'd lost, my husband, my friends, my job, was a bitter pill, and with each passing day, the taste grew only more acrid. I knew I needed to make a change, to somehow claw my way out of the hole I'd dug for myself. Finding a new job became my mission, a way to start over, to rebuild from the ashes of my former life. But the small community I'd once loved for its warmth and closeness now felt suffocating, as whispers and judgment followed me wherever I went. My reputation, tarnished by my own actions, was a barrier I hadn't anticipated, making each job interview feel like an insurmountable hurdle. The realization hit me like a wave, the full extent of the consequences of my betrayal washing over me. I wasn't just the woman who had left her husband. I was the woman who had shattered her own life, piece by piece. My peers, my colleagues, even casual acquaintances looked at me differently, their eyes a mix of pity and disdain. I had become a cautionary tale, a living example of how quickly one's world can unravel. In my loneliness, I reached out to the only people I hoped might still offer me a shred of understanding, my family. The conversation was strained, filled with long silences and hesitant words. They listened as I poured out my regrets, my voice cracking with emotion, but the skepticism was palpable. They offered cautious words of support, but the weariness in their eyes told me the road to redemption would be long and fraught with doubt. Nights were the worst. The quiet of my apartment amplified the loneliness, each tick of the clock a reminder of the solitary path I now walked. I tossed and turned, wrestling with the reality that my choices had led me here, to a life devoid of the warmth and connection I once took for granted. Then, one day, as I wandered through the park, lost in my thoughts, I ran into Sarah, my former neighbor. The encounter was awkward, the gap between our last friendly barbecue and now filled with unspoken words and shared discomfort. Yet, Sarah, perhaps sensing my desperation, offered a piece of advice that struck a chord. True remorse, Emily, and a willingness to change. That's the only way forward. Her words, simple yet profound, offered a glimmer of hope, a possibility that perhaps, even in the depths of my despair, there was a path back to some semblance of the person I once was. This chapter of my life, marked by reflection and the stark realization of my actions' impact, was perhaps the beginning of a long journey toward forgiveness, not just from those I'd hurt, but from myself. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with challenges and the need for genuine change. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way out of the darkness. The morning I started volunteering at the local shelter, my nerves were a tangled mess, the uncertainty of stepping into a new role gnawing at me. But as I threw myself into the work, something shifted. The simple act of helping others, of being part of something bigger than my own troubles, sparked a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah's words echoed in my mind, a guiding light through the fog of my remorse. I found further solace in a support group for people who'd veered off their intended paths. Sitting in a circle, sharing my story, and listening to others, I didn't feel so alone. There was a shared understanding, a collective striving for redemption that made my own burden feel lighter. Acknowledging my mistakes in front of strangers was terrifying, yet liberating, a crucial step on my journey towards forgiveness. Rebuilding trust with my family was no easy feat. It started with small steps, simple acts of kindness and openness that gradually thawed the frosty atmosphere. Each conversation, each shared moment, was a brick in the foundation of our slowly mending relationship. It was a delicate dance, one step forward, sometimes two steps back, but I was determined to show them, and myself, that I was committed to change. Then came the job opportunity at a small bookstore. It was a far cry from my previous career, but it offered me something invaluable, a chance to reconnect with my love for literature and to rebuild my life on my own terms. The smell of books, the quiet hum of readers lost in other worlds, it was a balm to my troubled soul. Here, I was just Emily, not the woman who had made a disastrous mistake. Working at the bookstore, I began to piece together my shattered self-worth. I rediscovered the joy of independence, the satisfaction of earning my own way, and the realization that my happiness was not tethered to anyone else. I was learning to stand on my own, to find fulfillment in my own company and in the small pleasures of my day-to-day life. Accepting my new reality was perhaps the hardest pill to swallow. The life I had once envisioned for myself was gone, but in its place, I was slowly building something new, something authentically mine. The acceptance of this fact was a quiet moment of clarity, a surrender to the flow of life that brought with it a strange sense of peace. Fueled by this newfound acceptance, I made plans for the future. Furthering my education, pursuing a degree in literature with the dream of teaching one day, became my new goal. It was a vision for a future that was mine alone, shaped by my experiences, my mistakes, and my efforts to move forward. Sarah's advice had set me on this path, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I felt equipped to face it with a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. This chapter of my life, marked by the pursuit of redemption and self-discovery, was just the beginning. I sealed the envelope containing my letter to Mark. My heart was racing, a tumult of hope and fear swirling inside me. It wasn't about wanting him back, it was about acknowledging the wreckage I'd left behind. With each word pinned, I poured out apologies and truths I'd held back, a sincere wish for his happiness threaded through my confessions. Dropping that letter into the mailbox felt like shedding a heavy burden, a step towards forgiveness, if not from him, then from myself. Days later, when Mark's response landed in my hands, my breath caught. He didn't offer forgiveness, but his words were kind, a wish for me to find peace and happiness in my journey forward. That letter became a form of closure, a silent agreement to move on from the pain we'd caused each other, allowing the wounds to finally begin healing. Finding joy in the simple things became my new mantra. Reading to children at the bookstore, their eager faces lit up with wonder, filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It was in these moments, surrounded by the innocent laughter and endless curiosity of kids, that I started to feel a part of something again, a sense of community slowly weaving its way around me. My days found a new rhythm, juggling work at the bookstore with online classes. I was determined to rebuild my life, to create a future that was mine alone. Each assignment completed, each book read, was a brick in the foundation of my new life, a life built on resilience and the desire for growth. As time passed, the tentative messages from old friends began to trickle in, each one a tentative step towards rebuilding lost connections. Their willingness to reach out, to tentatively bridge the gap our separation had created, was a testament to the power of genuine change. We met, shared stories, and slowly, the foundation for new memories was laid, each laugh and shared silence a balm to the wounds of our past. Reflecting on my journey, I marveled at how far I had come. The growth I'd experienced, the lessons learned from each stumble and fall, had shaped me into someone stronger, more resilient. I had found a strength within myself I hadn't known existed, a resilience forged through the trials of my past. Hope began to color my dreams again, dreams of what the future could hold, of the possibilities that lay ahead. My newfound perspective and maturity opened my eyes to a world of opportunities, a future where my past didn't define me, but rather informed the choices I made and the paths I chose to follow. Through volunteering and my job, a new support network began to take shape, a community of individuals who valued me for who I was now, not for the mistakes I'd made. Friendship and acceptance surrounded me, offering a sense of belonging I had longed for. Moving into a slightly larger apartment was a physical manifestation of my progress, a symbol of my growing independence and the steps I was taking towards building a life I could be proud of. It was a small space, but it was mine, filled with the promise of new beginnings and the hope of what was to come. Yet, amidst the growth and new beginnings, I understood that some bridges were permanently burned, their ashes a reminder of the consequences of my actions. This realization wasn't a weight but a grounding force, a reminder to cherish the present and the new paths I was forging. My journey wasn't about redemption in the eyes of those I'd hurt. It was about creating a meaningful life from the lessons I'd learned, about moving forward with grace and the knowledge that while not all can be forgiven, the breakup felt right at first, like finally catching my breath after being underwater for too long. You know those memes about husbands being like another kid? That's how it felt. A break. I grinned, half joking, to John. His face fell. That familiar puppy dog pout. You're serious? He said, the word hanging between us. That should have been my sign, the flicker of worry in his voice. But I brushed it off, told him to relax and enjoy the peace and quiet. He pretended to laugh it off, but I knew I'd hurt him. Night one was incredible. Dinner with the girls, drinks that went down way too smooth, zero complaints about me getting home late. I fell asleep with a giddy buzz I hadn't felt since college. This was going to be fun. Cut to a few weeks in, and that buzz turned into a nagging hum. My apartment felt emptier, my nights too long. Turns out, being able to do whatever I wanted wasn't as great as I thought. I missed John. Not the nagging part of him, but the warm, cozy feeling of someone always having my back. The way he'd leave a goofy note and a half-eaten breakfast sandwich on the counter for me. Mark from the gym sensed it, I guess. He upped the charm, invited me to his fancy workout class, then out for smoothies. When he offered to actually cook dinner one night, something inside me snapped. This guy, smelling of expensive cologne and protein powder, was way more than I bargained for on this lil break. Mark slowed down, I warned him, and he did his whole hurt feelings routine. And then he did the thing I absolutely wasn't expecting. He kissed me, right there on his modern, uncomfortable couch. In that moment, John's face flashed in my mind, the real John, not the caricature I'd been painting for myself. The guilt hit like a ton of bricks. Oh God, this is bad, I stammered, pushing him away. He laughed. That bad? Huh? But I wasn't playing along anymore. Back home that night, I tried to shake the feeling of betrayal. Stupidly, I texted John hi, just to see. He messaged back within seconds, like he'd been waiting by his phone. My heart did a weird flutter. Miss you, he wrote, with a stupid heart emoji of all things. That was it, the turning point, the moment I realized this break was heading down a dangerous path. It wasn't just about Mark or the guilt. It was realizing that John didn't deserve this version of me. The next morning my phone blew up. It was my brother, but not his usual jokey texts. We need to talk, was all it said, followed by the dreaded coffee shop emoji. This was serious. He slumped on my couch, hair a mess, dark circles under his eyes I'd never noticed before. She's seeing someone, he blurted out, voice cracking. John's wife. Your whole freaking break thing went sideways for her too. The words barely registered. Shock froze me. Mark, he continued, the name sounding sour in his mouth. That gym trainer dude, that's who she's with. I wanted to scream, to blame my brother for John's pain. For this mess I'd started. News of the fling spread like wildfire. My best friend, bless her, came over with a bottle of wine and a worried look on her face. She tried to play it cool, offering up advice in that careful tone you use around a wounded animal. Look, if this break isn't what you thought, maybe, she trailed off. But that night, in bed, Mark's texts pinged one after another. Forget them, he wrote, smooth as ever. Tonight, we make your break worthwhile. He was relentless, promising nights out, fancy dinners, anything to distract me from the pit in my stomach. And for a while, it worked. We went to trendy bars, the kind I only ever saw on TV, and he knew all the right people to charm. I tried to play along, were the part of the carefree woman having the time of her life. But every time the laughter died down, John's face would swim into focus. At home, things felt different. John didn't mention Mark, but he didn't need to. The apartment pulsed with unspoken questions. He started leaving me little things, my favorite cookies, a new book he knew I'd love. It felt like a silent apology, one I wasn't sure I deserved. Mark was the opposite. He was all fire and intensity. One moment, he'd tell me I was the only thing that mattered, and the next he'd pick a fight, accusing me of playing games. You can't go back, you know, he'd hiss when I tried to pull away. Even as his touch began to feel like sandpaper, I'd cave, craving the excitement that drowned out the guilt. That's how I found myself in situations I never imagined. A hotel room with Mark after a whirlwind weekend getaway, the smell of chlorine and his expensive cologne making me sick. I couldn't look myself in the mirror anymore. This was meant to be fun, a break. But instead, it was a trap, and I was the one who'd sprung it. The guilt was eating me from the inside out. I'd skip dinners with my parents, making up excuses, terrified of running into John while I was dressed up and clinging to Mark's arm. Then, at their anniversary party, there he was, looking better than ever. Beside him stood a woman, calm, elegant, and the furthest thing from me in her simple dress and understated jewelry. It was like looking at an alternate universe where I didn't make a colossal mess. Mark squeezed my hand, probably assuming possessiveness would fix the situation. It didn't. The whole evening was a blur. My mom, always so warm, gave me a strained smile that sent shivers down my spine. Dad, usually overflowing with bad jokes, barely said a word. Mark, thankfully, kept the attention on himself with his charm and stories I could barely listen to. On the way home, the silence in the car was crushing. Mark tried to joke, well, your parents don't seem to be my biggest fans. An understatement of the century. Mark, this isn't working, I finally blurted out. It was weak, pathetic, but I couldn't string together a proper sentence. Don't get dramatic, he smirked, but there was a tightness in his jaw that betrayed his cool act. One bad night, and you're folding already? I can't do this anymore. The words felt leaden. He laughed, that sharp, ugly laugh. You're kidding, right? This is when it gets good, he said, a dangerous edge in his voice. Besides, think your precious Johnny boy is sitting at home pining for you? The next few days were a blur of awkward calls to my best friend, tearful apologies, and half-hearted attempts to get Mark to leave me alone. He'd switched from Prince Charming to full-on stalker mode. Texts, calls, showing up at my work. Then, the real kick in the teeth. My mom's sister, the nosiest person in our whole family, called. Word's getting around about you and that gym guy, honey. And poor John. Well, he's not taking it well. Gossip travels fast in a small town, but hearing it from my aunt made it sickeningly real. Her voice wasn't angry, just disappointed. Like I was a child who'd broken a favorite vase, not a grown woman who'd shattered her life. That night, I finally worked up the courage. John, I typed, then deleted. We need to talk, I settled for, and hit send before I could lose my nerve. The wait for his reply was agonizing. John's response came in less than a minute. Meet me at the cafe. He didn't add the usual, not the one where we first met, or any attempt at a sweet memory. Just cold, precise directions. Walking there felt like a death march. Each step brought back the good times, the way John's eyes crinkled as he laughed, the silly way he always ordered 2 cappuccinos because he'd inevitably spill half of the first one. Now those memories were tainted, overlaid with Mark's cologne and the image of that woman at the anniversary, her serene smile mocking my entire existence. John was already at a corner table, looking different. Not just the better haircut and the touch of gray at his temples, but something in his eyes. A hardness I'd never seen before. "You wanted to talk?" His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. The words came out in a rush. "I'm so sorry about everything. Mark, the whole break thing was a huge mistake. I want to fix this, if we still can." John held up his hand, stopping my pathetic apology dead in its tracks. "I'm actually here to discuss practical things. The apartment, splitting up our accounts, all that." Practical? I choked on the word. "But John, I was stupid." "You were selfish," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "I waited, thinking you'd come to your senses. Turns out, I was the stupid one." He tossed a folder on the table. "My lawyer drafted a preliminary separation agreement. It's pretty standard, of course, if you want a contest." The cafe whirled around me. John, hiring a lawyer, while I was flitting around with Mark. Everything had turned upside down. "Wait," I sputtered, "your lawyer? There's someone else?" He finally looked me straight in the eye. No sadness, no anger, just that cold resolve that terrified me. "Yes," he confirmed, "there is." He stood up, pushing in his chair with meticulous precision, the picture of a man with a plan. "Look it over when you have a clear head. Let me know if you have any changes. Otherwise, sign and we can both move on." And with that, he walked out, leaving me alone with the bitter taste of coffee and betrayal. The separation agreement sat on my kitchen table for 3 whole days. I reread each clause until the words blurred. Standard, splitting assets, blah blah blah. My life was being divided as neatly as a pie chart. Except there was nothing neat about the raging storm in my chest. My best friend, bless her, finally stormed over. "I can't take it anymore. You're moping around, letting Mark manipulate you, and meanwhile, John's probably off on honeymoon with Miss Perfect." "He's not," I mumbled, finally looking up, "just being smart and moving on." "And you?" She grabbed the papers, her eyes scanning them. "Signing this is like giving up without a fight." That night, I dreamt of John and his mystery woman in absurd, vivid scenarios. Riding a tandem bike, matching sweaters, singing karaoke, each image seared into my brain. Waking up felt like plunging into icy water. I couldn't take it anymore. Mark, sensing my weakness like a wolf circling an injured deer, doubled down. Fancy dinners, gifts left on my doorstep, the full cliché playbook. And, pathetically, it sort of worked. For a night, the expensive bubbly and his practiced charm drowned out the guilt. But the mornings? Those were brutal. John's random texts about bills or insurance felt like little stings. The fact that he was barely fazed by our marriage crumbling drove my desperation to a whole new level. Mark was the embodiment of everything John wasn't. Impulsive, loud, living life on a constant adrenaline high. I hated that I craved that rush, that I started dressing differently, talking louder, just to fit his world. The old me felt like a dusty costume I'd thrown in the attic. And yet, one evening after a particularly outrageous party Mark threw at his penthouse, champagne and half-naked models were apparently involved. I stumbled back to my quiet apartment, and the loneliness hit like a physical blow. What on earth was I doing? My phone lit up, "John, but not about bills. Are you okay?" It read, simple, yet it shattered the facade of control I was frantically trying to build. With trembling fingers, I typed back, "Can we talk?" His response was immediate, "Tomorrow." Just like that, I'd thrown a wrench into his perfectly organized plans. A bitter thrill of satisfaction ran through me. Maybe I wasn't completely done fighting after all. Meeting John was like stepping into a boxing ring after a decade of avoiding exercise. We picked a neutral cafe, neither of our old haunts. He looked even more different, not just fit, but a sharp edge to him that scared and yet intrigued me. "So," I started, "stupidest word ever, this whole lawyer thing. Seems a bit much, no?" He didn't even blink. "After everything, We need a clean break. Makes it easier for everyone. Easier for you. Maybe. I snapped back, then hated myself for sounding whiny. That's when it started. Not a shouting match, but John laying out the facts, his voice calm and lawyerly. My impulsive break, my sneaking around with Mark. The nights John spent waiting up, the lies, the whole pathetic spectacle. With every word, it wasn't John the first pictured, but my dad. The way his face would change when I disappointed him, that coldness behind his eyes. And that hurt more than any yelling could have. Mark has a temper, I said weakly. The whole thing got messy. John cut me off. He threatened me, threatened my family. With the lawyers, this is about protection. For you too. Protection? I almost choked on the word. Then it hit me. John's brother, the loose cannon, had probably blabbed everything. My stomach churned. How much did John actually know? The waitress interrupted us, placing the bill in its neat little tray. I reached for it on instinct, but John's hand stopped me. Let me, he said. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple act of taking charge. Another reminder of the capable man I'd tossed aside. Before I could protest, he placed a few crisp bills down. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something. Was it pity? He stood, not offering a goodbye hug or any pretense of civility, just a curt nod. The lawyers will be in touch, he said, and walked out. Alone, surrounded by the buzz of couples enjoying their lattes, I crumpled. It wasn't Mark's temper I was afraid of anymore. It was the finality in John's eyes. I'd messed up royally, and now, just maybe, it was too late to fix. Mark wasn't going down quietly. Like a wounded animal, he turned vicious. My phone lit up with his texts, each one meaner than the last. Psycho, gold digger, even veiled threats about knowing things. Then the rumors started, not just gossip, but nasty stuff planted online, whispered at work, questions about my mental state, made up stories about past flings, anything to chip away at my reputation. Mark was trash, but he was smart, weaving just enough truth into his lies. The worst part? My parents. They didn't confront me directly, too polite for that. Instead, it was the sad phone calls, checking in, just to see how I was doing, in that overly concerned voice that screamed disappointment. One afternoon, I broke down sobbing at my mom's kitchen table, all the righteous anger gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. She stroked my hair, murmuring comforting platitudes, the same ones she used when I fell off my bike as a kid. But this was a wound no bandage could fix. Out of nowhere, a name flashed in my mind, Mrs. Peterson, my old high school English teacher, strict as hell, but with a surprising streak of compassion beneath her iron lady exterior. On a whim, I messaged her. Her response came back hours later, not comforting, but blunt. Come to my office tomorrow. Mrs. Peterson's office was exactly the same. Stacks of books, the smell of old paper, and a framed quote behind her desk. The hero's journey isn't a straight line, but a circle. I hadn't thought of that quote in years. You made your choices, she said flatly, not even offering me tea. Now live with the consequences. But here's the thing about circles, you don't end up where you started. Learn from this mess. Her words stung, but it was the kick in the pants I needed. I spent the night drafting replies to Mark's texts. Scorching, but not crazy. My best friend served as the voice of reason on that one, and gathering evidence. Screenshots, old emails, anything to prove his smear campaign. The next morning, armed with coffee and a newfound resolve, I didn't go to work. Instead, I went straight to a lawyer's office. Not John's lawyer, a different one. A woman with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense haircut that signaled she was on my side before I even uttered a word. Turns out, weaponizing a breakup takes a special kind of lowlife, but it's also legally actionable. A cease and desist letter, the threat of exposing Mark's lies. It wouldn't erase the damage, but it might muzzle him for good. I signed those legal papers, a weird mix of satisfaction and shame coursing through me. This was the new low in my spectacularly bad decisions. The cease and desist did its job. Mark backed off, the texts stopped, the rumors faded just as quickly as they appeared. But the relief I expected never came. Instead, a kind of grayness settled over me. I was winning the legal battles, but the war inside my head felt far from over. Therapy, even saying the word felt foreign. My best friend dragged me to that first appointment, practically bundling me into the overly beige office. The therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut, started with simple questions. Sleep patterns, appetite, normal stuff. Then she asked, "When you think about what happened with Mark, how do you feel?" And that's when I crumbled. Not graceful sobbing, but ugly, snotty tears, the kind you don't even try to hide. Words tumbled out. The excitement of the break, the guilt, the thrill of Mark, my loneliness, the crushing weight of disappointment. It wasn't pretty, but as I rambled on, the therapist did something unexpected. She didn't try to sugarcoat it. "You didn't just make a mistake," she said. "You made a series of choices. That doesn't make you a bad person, but you can't pretend they didn't have consequences." That honesty was like a slap, but a needed one. Mark wasn't the sole villain here. I had willingly hurt the people closest to me, all for a cheap thrill. Each therapy session was like peeling layers off an onion, revealing uncomfortable truths I'd rather have kept hidden. And then the bombshell, a job offer. A friend of a friend thing, in a city 3 states away. Not glamorous, but a chance to disappear, start fresh. My immediate response was, hell yes. It seemed like the perfect escape. Telling John wasn't the dramatic showdown I'd expected. He seemed resigned. A flicker of emotion crossed his face, then vanished behind a wall of politeness. It was the final confirmation that whatever we had was over. My goodbye party was a blur. Friends wishing me well, forced smiles, too much wine. Late in the night, my best friend, tipsy and teary-eyed, grabbed my arm. "I have to tell you something," she slurred. "I'm the one who told John about you and Mark, right at the beginning. I thought I was doing the right thing. Betrayal, but of a different kind. Yet, I understood, twisted loyalty, just like I'd felt loyalty to Mark in those messed up early weeks." Anger bubbled up, then fizzled out. What was the point? Moving day was a somber affair. My brother showed up, not to talk about my terrible decisions, but to help load the truck. We worked in silence, a quiet understanding between us. As I pulled away, he tossed a brown paper bag onto the passenger seat. "Sub sandwich," he said, a hint of a smile in his voice, "in case you get hungry on your journey to become a better human." Then, with an awkward hug, he turned and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the start of